Number 10, psychotic break. In February 2019, a single mother from Brazil found herself beaten within an inch of her life and lying in a hospital bed just hours after what was the worst first date that anyone could possibly have. 57-year-old Elaine Caparrós, who owns a landscaping business, wanted to bring a bit of spark to her life. She'd been single and living alone in her Rio de Janeiro apartment for what felt like an eternity. Her son had moved to the US and she didn't really have anyone by her side. So she did what most people would do in this day and age and made a profile on a dating app. That's where she found 27-year-old Vicinius Serra, who seemed like the man of her dreams. As a matter of fact, the two kept the conversation going and got super close over the course of the next 8 months, after which she finally mustered up the courage to invite him over for dinner. Everything was going fine and it seemed like the spark was there in real life too, as they hung out and then cuddled up in bed together. However, just hours later, she woke up with Serra sitting on top of her with his hands around her throat trying to strangle her. When she tried to resist, he bit her on her arms and then started punching her repeatedly. He didn't hold back either. Despite her screams and cries for help, he kept hitting her for the next 4 hours. Thankfully, early next morning, the neighbors heard the commotion and alerted the building's security guards, who broke into the apartment and intervened. When they got inside, they could tell something horrible had happened. There were blood spots everywhere, and the victim was covered in bruises. Serra tried to flee, but the exits were blocked, and he was eventually apprehended. According to him, he drank too much wine and woke up in a psychotic break, which forced him to hit Elaine for hours. Elaine, on the other hand, couldn't remember much after the first few punches and needed over 40 stitches to recover. Upon further investigation, it was discovered that Serra had given the doorman a fake name when he entered Elaine's building and signed the guest book as Felipe, almost as if he had had the sick plan all along and believed he could get away with it. Number 9, getaway driver. In February 2020, a Massachusetts woman somehow ended up as a getaway driver after her simple first date turned into a full-blown bank heist. The 40-year-old woman had met 33-year-old Christopher Castillo through a dating app, and after some initial exchanges, the two decided to go for a drive together. She picked him up from his parents' house in Rhode Island and drove him up to her own place in North Attleboro, Massachusetts. Oddly enough, Castillo was busy downing wine throughout the journey, which was a strange start to the date in and of itself. Things really escalated, though, when he asked her to pull over at the Bristol County Savings Bank for a quick ATM stop, to which she obliged. Minutes later, however, she saw him running out to the car while clutching a gun, hat, sunglasses, and $1,000 in cash. As soon as he got in, he told her to put the pedal to the metal. Yup, she was now the getaway driver in a bank robbery. But of course, it wasn't hard for the police to catch on to them, as this happened in broad daylight. They were both arrested, not knowing that the woman didn't really even know what was happening. It was later revealed that Castillo, who had an extensive criminal record, told the teller that he was really hurting and needed the money while flashing an antique gun. Initially, the cops thought the woman had been in on the scheme from the beginning and charged her with being an accessory after the fact. She was arrested and held on $250,000 bail, but she insisted that she had never intended to be the getaway driver, and prosecutors ultimately dropped the charges. Castillo, however, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. Number 8, plenty of piranhas. In August 2016, a single father's first date turned into a complete nightmare when he realized that he'd been set up to be robbed and murdered. 27-year-old Adam Hillary thought he'd found the girl of his dreams after he matched with 18-year-old Haley Rose Bustos on a dating app called Plenty of Fish. Little did he know that he was about to fall into a pit full of piranhas. On their first date, he picked her up and took her to a bowling alley in Winter Haven, Florida. Hours later, they were together at his place enjoying a romantic night. In fact, after the date, Haley even texted him saying that she'd like to spend the following night with him too. Of course, at that point, it almost seemed too good to be true. Well, sadly for Adam, it was because when the next night rolled around, she showed up at his apartment with 3 men, including 2 career criminals on probation for violent felonies. As soon as he responded to the knock on the door, they overpowered him and forced their way inside. He didn't even put up a fight or anything, was just begging for his life while saying that he had a 5-year-old daughter. None of them paid any heed to his cries, though, as they shot him in the head, stole a bunch of furniture and money from the apartment. Apparently, Haley had been involved in a similar robbery before, too, and was paid $50 cash for the info. If there's such a thing as a consolation, though, it's that all 4 suspects were eventually arrested and charged with murder. Number 7, bad role models. In February 2022, a German teen set up a fake dating profile to lure a man on a first date only to stab him in the neck. 19-year-old Sarah idolized American serial killers like Richard Ramirez and Ted Bundy and wanted to be just like them. In fact, she even had posters of them in her bedroom walls, so when she texted one of her friends saying that she was about to get her first kill, it was never going to end well. First, she created a fake dating profile with the name Dominicherry and matched up with 30-year-old Zaid. She managed to set up a first date with the sole intention of killing him for sport. On the day of truth, Zayed picked her up from the apartment in Bavaria as they were meant to go for dinner. She wasn't patient enough to sit down and have a meal first. She instantly pounced on him and stabbed him in the neck with a camping knife. Zayed was able to snatch the knife from her and hit the brakes, but it was already too late. He fell into a coma and succumbed to his injuries 3 weeks later in the hospital. A bloodied Sarah was arrested almost an hour away from the crime scene and was handed a 12-year sentence in socio-therapeutic facilities. What's the worst date you've been on? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 6. Buried alive. In May 2014, a French woman flew all the way to Morocco for a first date with her online lover, only to get buried alive in his backyard. 25-year-old Mina El Houari thought that she'd found the love of her life, and she'd been chatting with this Moroccan man for months. In fact, she planned an entire elaborate first date and booked a flight to Africa to meet him in person. Feeling giddy as a child in a candy store, she left her 5-star hotel in Fez to finally meet her lover, but sadly, Lady Luck had other plans for her. Hours later, she found herself slowly suffocating to death in a makeshift grave. Apparently, she was an undiagnosed diabetic and fell into a coma while she was there. Her date panicked and thought she just keeled over and died. The man believed that the only way he wouldn't go down for her quote unexpected death was to bury her in his backyard. Little did he know that she was actually still alive, and it was the suffocation that killed her in the end. El Houari's family flew to Morocco, filed a report, and started retracing her steps, which led them to her date's house, where, of course, they found her grave. After a short trial, the man confessed to his crime and was charged with involuntary manslaughter. Number 5. Fever Dream. In April 2016, a Renton mother's first date turned into a horror show as she not only did go missing, but when she finally was found 3 days later, her body wasn't even intact anymore. 40-year-old Ingrid Line, who was a registered nurse and mother of 3, was ready to move on from her divorce and rediscover love when she matched with 37-year-old John Robert Charlton on a dating app. After a month of talking, they planned a sweet first date where she'd send off the kids to their father so that the pair could head out for a fun night and attend a baseball game. After the game, they went to a bar where they got drunk and headed back to Ingrid's house. The next thing you know, Charlton wakes up on a sidewalk in downtown Seattle next to his date's Toyota Highlander. Ingrid is nowhere to be seen. In fact, no one could find her because her phone, wallet, and other belongings were at her house, so it seemed like she vanished without a trace. The police arrested Charlton on the spot, and he was the prime suspect. 3 days after the incident, a man living near East Pine Street discovered human remains in a dumpster, which were later confirmed to be Ingrid's. That's not all, though, as throughout the week, the police kept finding more of her body parts around town in coolers and recycling centers. Despite Charlton saying that he didn't remember anything, it was discovered that he had cut his date up with a chainsaw which was found in her bathroom, and scattered her body parts around town. He was then sentenced to 27 years in prison. Number 4. Speedboat Seducer. In December 2015, a Paddington man's attempt to woo his first date by showing off his speedboat went horribly wrong as they were thrown overboard after an accident. 30-year-old Jack Shepard, who bought an 80s speedboat to impress women, met the 24-year-old Charlotte Brown on a dating app. After an initial spark was felt, they decided to go have a thrill ride around the River Thames. So, after a nice and romantic meal at the Shard, they got some booze and strapped into his dinghy boat. Oh, and this wasn't Shepard's first rodeo, as he'd used this boat to impress over 10 women already in the past. This trip, however, didn't go exactly according to plan, as the couple sped around the House of Parliament, thinking that was the best ride of their lives. Somewhere along the way, though, he got a bit too cocky and pushed his boat to the limit by driving at more than double the 12-knot speed limit. But of course, he'd done this before, so it was mostly smooth sailing. With that said, he made the mistake of giving his date control during their return trip, and when she tried to follow suit by going full throttle, the boat hit a submerged log and tipped over, sending them both into the river near the Wandsworth Bridge. Shepard managed to cling on to the hull, but sadly, Charlotte didn't, as her lifeless body was recovered later from the river. After a drawn-out trial, the speedboat seducer was convicted of manslaughter by gross negligence. Number 3. Too hot to handle. In August 2021, a Massachusetts woman abandoned her first date hike with an Arizona cop due to the heat, but sadly didn't even have it in her to come back down alive. 31-year-old Angela Tremonti had traveled all the way to Arizona to meet up with Phoenix police officer Dario Didzar for what was supposed to be a pretty fun first date. What they didn't factor into contention before they began their Camelback Mountain hike, though, was the fact that it was one of the hottest days of the year. On top of that, they foolishly forgot to bring water. So at the halfway mark, Angela gave up and asked Dizdar to carry on because she still wanted photos on the top of her social media. Rather than acting like a responsible police guy, he let her go and continued on. When he came back down expecting her to be next to his car, she was nowhere to be seen. After 3 hours of searching, emergency crews found her unconscious by a house next to the mountain where she was apparently trying to get help. But in a tragic turn of events, the heat was just way too much for her and she died. Her family called for Dario to be held accountable as he should have been more responsible and walked her down. With that said, the judge ruled out any foul play and her death was attributed to accidental heat exposure instead. Number 2. Twisted Strangler. In April 2022, a Connecticut man was charged with strangling a New York nurse to death on their first date. 30-year-old Daniel Drayton met 29-year-old nurse Samantha Stewart via Tinder. They instantly hit it off and decided that it'd be a good idea to hook up on their first date. They got dinner and headed off to Samantha's apartment to enjoy the night together. It wasn't the night of fun and pleasure that she was hoping for, though. As soon as the door closed behind them, Drayton turned into an entirely different man and started beating her. The night turned incredibly morbid a few hours later when he strangled her to death and then engaged in sexual activity with her dead body, displaying how twisted his mind was. After he finished, he stole her credit cards and booked a one-way flight to California. Drayton didn't get very far, though, because he was arrested within a week and extradited to New York, where he's set to receive a sentence of at least 25 years in prison. Number 1. Lethal Bear Hug. In April 2015, a Somerville woman mysteriously disappeared after she'd gone on a first date, which also turned out to be the last date of her life. 28-year-old Ashley Pegram was a single mother of 3 and ready to rediscover love and rekindle her romantic life, so she downloaded the social media app Kik and met Edward Bonilla on it. The pair had some chemistry and decided to meet up for a real date. You know the drill. However, little did she know that this would be the last time she'd be seen alive. They shared some drinks with each other, after which Pegram kinda got out of control, saying that he couldn't, quote, handle her. And as a result, he kicked her out of his car on some random deserted street in the middle of the night. The real story, though, was revealed later in court when he testified that in a fit of alcohol-induced rage, he put her into a bear hug, after which she fell to the ground dead. Also, to hide the evidence, he dumped her body in some remote area outside of Harleysville. And honestly, he almost got away with it too, as it took police almost a month to recover her body. Pegram was then arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Thanks for watching. What would you do if you showed up on a first date only to realize that you've been catfished? Tell us in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.